Hey, psychology aficionados. My name is Liz Wright, and I am a professor of psychology at Northwest Vista College in San Antonio, Texas. And I've been doing this series of Let's Talk Psychology videos to talk about things that I've seen, things that I've thought about throughout the day. And one of the things I was thinking about today was how people's preferences for films might either, indicate their personality or correlate with their personality. And the reason why I started thinking about this is my husband is very big into horror movies, and he's definitely movie a movie monster buff. So if you want to ask him, who's the scariest movie monster, things like that, he has some great answers to that. Me, on the other hand, I am not there for the jump scares. I am not there for the blood, guts, and gore. I do not want to watch horror movies. And they, make me anxious. I already have anxiety. I don't need any help, is what I tell him. And so it's always been interesting to me of like, is there some sort of, personality difference or something like that, brain difference between people who are interested in watching, movies that scare them as opposed to people who maybe aren't interested in watching movies that scare them. So I spent a little time today looking at articles relating to personality and brain functioning and how movies influence those things and are related to those things. And there's a lot of different stuff out there. There's a lot of people making statements about, like people who are this way, like this type of movie, but there's no references. And I'm like, well, I don't know how many posts on like LinkedIn and stuff I commented on today, like sources, like, hey, you want to give me some science to back this up or something. So I did find a couple of actual primary sources that have scientific data to back up their stuff. One that I was looking at that I think was interesting relates to structures in the brain. So if you're studying psychology right now, one of the things that you might recognize is that biology plus psychology, or what we call biopsych, is a very big research area. Almost all of the undergraduate or graduate programs in the United States are either offering or requiring students to take this class, the biopsych class. And what it does is it really brings together biology, so how your body works, and then how your mental functioning interacts with that biology. And some of the classes at different schools focus more on the biology aspect. Some of the classes focus more on the psychology aspect, so behaviors and mental processes aspect. And it really depends upon, your college and the textbooks that they choose, because there are some textbooks that are highly biology oriented and less focus on psychology, so behaviors and mental processes, the things that students actually expect to learn about when they're taking a psychology class. And then there are some that are more focused on the psychology and less focused on the biology. It is hard to find a kind of middle of the road biopsych textbook that that kind of talks evenly about both the biology and the things that students expect to learn in psychology classes about behaviors and mental processes. So if you're going to take that class, keep in mind there is a lot of bio to it. You're going to be learning about neurotransmitters and brain structures and functions and sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system and all that sort of stuff, which if you're interested in going into science, psychiatry, any of that sort of stuff, those are definitely going to be useful. So random sidetrack there about biopsych. So one of the sources that I found today was a biopsych focus on two specific structures in the brain. So first was the amygdala that they were looking at, which is basically responsible for a lot of our emotional processing. So fight or flight, that sort of stuff. And then another part of the brain that this group studied was the nucleus accumbens, which is kind of the reward center of the brain. So if you're studying substance use, if you're studying behaviors that relate to addiction potential, then you might be studying that brain structure and how it functions and how it influences our behaviors. So these researchers had participants in an fMRI machine, functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is a really cool machine, that also very expensive, that shows specifically which areas of the brain are working harder or are processing more information when specific stimuli are presented. So I kind of joke that, certain things light up a certain area because that area is increasing in blood flow and it's, requiring more energy because it's working more. So what these researchers found is specifically related to action and horror movies. So in terms of action movies, people who preferred action movies actually had high amounts of activity in the amygdala, so the emotional area, but also in the nucleus accumbens. So the reward center of the brain and the emotional centers of the brain. So it's as if watching something like this was rewarding. And another thing that I looked at today was focusing on why people might like action movies. One of the potential reasons is that we kind of know as Americans specifically, because in other countries this is not the case always, that in an action movie, we know that the conflict is going to be resolved, and typically that the protagonist is going to win out. So the hero wins, and the movie ends, and there's closure. So it's quite possible that this reward center is anticipating that. And that is why people who are watching action movies or prefer action movies have this activation in that area of the brain. In terms of folks who watch horror movies, that they are less likely to be influenced by emotional stimuli. So there was less emotional or less stimulation in the amygdala than there was for the folks who watched the action movies when we're talking about horror movies. So it's almost as if like we are watching specifically movies that kind of we want to have our brain stimulated by, if that makes sense. So people who like documentaries or thrillers, both of the parts of the brain were significantly working during those times. So similar to action movie folks. And then comedies, we find that there was emotional stimuli, and that there was a preference for that emotional stimuli, but it was a less likely to hit the reward centers. So, what does this say about the movies that we're choosing? Well, it tells us that, particularly for these two parts of the brain, that there's definitely some impact, and that, if we need a positive emotional feeling, then maybe watching an action movie, maybe watching a comedy can, and this is something that we kind of know already, right? But we need the science in order to make sure that it's accurate. So watching a comedy, watching an action movie can increase affect or increase emotion. so that we can, feel better. I don't know about y'all, but if I'm ever in a dumpy mood, I have a couple of specific movies that I'm like, I want to sit down and watch this because I know it'll make me laugh. And it'll make me laugh out loud, which has different bodily responses and neurotransmitter responses than just kind of like chuckling or like, you know. So we want to find something that's going to literally make us laugh out loud if we want to decrease positive affect or positive mood. So what does that, think about your favorite type of movies. What does that tell you about your brain and what your brain is looking for? Let me know in the comments.